There's just been some challenges with some loss of our dear, young men. And so we invited Brendan Jaffe from Inspired Resolutions to come to help support and just find out what it is that we may need, but also share and talk about grief and how we
Yeah.
can grow through grief.
Yeah, and I think the message that we're giving them here tonight is important for everybody, and so we'll try and send the message out to everybody. I think that when I have spoke in the past at schools and in communities, I get the same message afterwards, and that's thank you for, we are going to go over the grief cycle, but thank you for not just talking about the grief cycle. And there's a few concepts and things that especially students at a school experience that people aren't really talking about. The students are talking about it. They'll come into my office and talk about it, but it's almost taboo to talk about. And so I'm hoping we can kind of have a little bit of a discussion about some of those things in addition to helping normalize some of the feelings and thoughts and experiences that people have. I think because you can't start a grief conversation without talking about the stages of grief. I'm going to let Caroline kind of go through the stages of grief, and then I'm going to, if I feel like, interject and interrupt you.
I think first is to recognize that grief comes as long as there's loss. It doesn't have to be person. It could be something that you love, from an animal to even your precious teddy that you might have loved as a young kid. There's a woman named Kubler-Ross who has thought of a theory about grief, and she believes that there's stages of grief that we go through. There is no right order, but there is just a process that we go through. So I'm just going to share with you some of those stages. So the first one is shock and denial. When something happens and you lose that, there's, what? Did this really happen? I don't believe it's happening. You're sometimes even numb, right? From there, you can have different types of emotions or thoughts that you process, from anger, being angry of why is this happening, or why can't this change? Just a lot of different emotions that way. But also, there's also depression and sadness, right? That's where I know for me, when I lose someone, I cry, It just hurts so much to not have someone or something that I'm just so used to having present in my life. We also go through, they call it the bargaining stage of things, of like, why does this have to happen? What can I do to make it better? Right? There's questions of how can we balance the difference with the loss. And through that all, we go through and we go to what she calls the acceptance stage. Not to say that, yes, we accept it and move on, but we get closer to be able to, like you said, normalize that this has happened.
I think the anger one for me is obviously because it's anger, the loudest one, but it's one that I think gets misinterpreted by a lot of caring individuals, parents, if it's, we're dealing with a teen, or counselors or teachers. And because I think we assume that these stages only apply to that grief. You're angry that that person has died, or that you have lost a station in life, or that you've moved, whatever it might be. But what I see happening with the anger stage is that it comes out in other ways. The anger a lot of times is kind of angry at everything around, and then maybe glimpses of, I'm angry that this has happened. But I think that's off-putting for a lot of people, and it becomes confusing. And I don't even know that the clients I work with who are experiencing that without help, a lot of times they're not even tying it to, right? Until you reflect to them, hey, this behavior is different for you. They don't go, oh yeah, I'm angry because I'm grieving. It's just, yeah, this is another thing. I'm angry at this because this on top of this on top of this, and now I'm angry. And so I think sometimes helping people step back and realize, hey, whatever your behavior that is different after grief, it may or may not be attributed to grief. You can't attribute all of life stuff to the grief, but an important process for us all is to say, okay, I'm acting different. Is this tied to the grief? Is this not tied to the grief? Is this maybe, does it make sense? I'm reacting in an appropriate way. And that's a really important conversation to have with people. Is my response appropriate? And when it comes to grieving, a lot of responses are appropriate that we don't even kind of think about. Any thoughts on that from anybody? Does that make sense?
I have lots of thoughts. They experienced me.
Okay. Yeah.
After my dad and my mom and, you know,
Yeah.
brother-in-law. It was just on edge all the time. Just
Yeah.
on edge, ready to, you know, sometimes just take somebody's head off.
Yeah.
And not always recognizing it, you know. Carolyn, thank goodness, would go, you know, are you okay? Really sweetly. Like, maybe you should stop.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, totally get that.
And I think that's, again, it's not out of the norm to be on edge, especially with that much loss. With a small loss or many losses or a big loss, it's not, I don't think anybody expects people to be on their best or at their best. But it's interesting because it comes out at times that sometimes you don't expect. And so if you are grieving, for instance, 2 years later, you're not going to have anybody who's thinking about it and going, hey, this might be could be attributed to grief. If it's a month later, everybody's willing to say, hey, are you okay? You know, do you need to talk? Do you need anything? Can I help you? And so I think something that's important about this grief cycle, the stages of grief, this grief cycle, is to understand that, number one, I think a lot of times it gets presented in a way that says, this is what you're going to, we're good about saying it could happen at any point in time, and it could go back, and you could get to the end and then go back to the front and the middle and everything. But what we're not good about saying is not everybody is going to experience all of these things, and some of this stuff happens years later. And you could literally get to the end and feel like you've resolved grief, and then something in your life happens, or shoot, hormones change in your life, and all of a sudden this grief is popping back up. I know in my life I had a friend pass away a very long time ago, one of my best friends, and it hit me really hard as it was happening. And then it was resolved. Many years went by, and I had a series of events happen that happened to have to do with relationships. I didn't lose somebody else, but there were some events that happened in some friendships and then with family, and that kind of triggered this almost constant thought of those times back in the day. And it wasn't in a positive way. It wasn't like I was in a good place. And it took me a while to go, oh my gosh, this is really kind of weird. This is popping back up for me. Why? And I didn't really resolve why. I really just have this vague sense that the period of time, some of the things that were going down in my life may have triggered that kind of feeling of grief again. And for me, I felt lost. It wasn't, I'm so sad that he's gone. It's, there's these weird feelings. I feel lost. Why do I feel lost? Everything's fine. I mean, I'm not lost. I've got a career. I've got friends. I've got family. But why do I feel so lost? And then the way I tied it was I remember I asked myself, what's the last time I felt this way? And it was back then. And so sometimes you don't really realize that you're experiencing a part of those stages. Does that make sense? Does anybody else can anybody else identify with any of that?
I think you touched on a really important point is when you have these thoughts or feelings because of thinking about someone we've lost, is to actually take a moment. So maybe if you can talk about that, because I think sometimes in this busy world, especially now with the holidays even coming, how do we process that and how do we navigate that?
I actually think it's different for a lot of people. For instance, I am not a quiet mind A lot of, I think our go-to is to tell people, actually take a break, sit down, be quiet, go in your room or something like that. And so for me, I know when I think. For instance, I think in the car, I think while I'm working out, I think when I'm sitting in my jacuzzi in my room, I'm not going to think. When it's quiet, I don't have those, I guess, as strong a reflective thought. And so I think first is asking yourself, well, what are the times that I can really kind of connect with myself, where I can, if it's being really quiet in your room, great. If it's being out in nature on a walk, great. If it's out surfing, or for some people it might be being in the busiest place possible alone or with other people. I don't know. And it's sometimes for some people, I think they need somebody else to talk things out with. And so I think first it's really asking yourself, when do I get that process done? And then this is going to seem so mind-blowing, being intentional about it. It's not rocket science. It's being intentional. And for me, in order for me to be intentional, I need to voice my plan. And so it's having a plan. I need to tell somebody somehow, hey, this is what I plan on doing. And that kind of, even if they don't hold me technically accountable, I feel more accountable for that. And then if I really need to get to the nitty-gritty and hold myself accountable, you actually schedule out time. I don't think most people, I think in theory, many people would say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. But most people aren't actually going to do that. So I think it's, once you recognize what you need to do to be intentional about that, talk about it with somebody. Say it out loud so you hear yourself say it.
I think for our kids right now, if we're going to talk about something specific, the anxiety, especially having had losses that are, inexplicable in some ways at that age, and feeling that anxiety of is there something else going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But then also helping them understand the fog that they're going to be in.
Sure.
I think that was not unexpected. It's not like I didn't know what I would go through in terms of feeling that, but how you're just unable to kind of cope and concentrate and move through things that are simple tasks.
Yeah.
And I literally had to, okay, today I'm going to do 30 minutes of this, and that had to be enough. I mean,
Yeah.
it just had to be enough because that's all I could give to it.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I like how you called it the fog, and the anxiety. And so we're stuck in this period of time in society where experiencing anxiety has become a diagnosis no matter what. It's like, if you experience it, it's bad. And I'm going to say something that may be kind of, something that not everybody agrees with, but if you experience loss suddenly, your anxiety attached to it is correct. It's not wrong. I, as a therapist, am not going to try to fix it for you. Now, I know a lot of other therapists and a lot of other people are going to try to give you these gimmicks and tricks to get rid of it, but the fact is, there are consequences, and they aren't your fault, to having somebody die in your life. And there are consequences that nobody can fix for you. And I think sometimes we have this mindset of, I'm going to figure this out, instead of, wow, this is going to be a really difficult period of time, and my anxiety and my fog is completely and totally correct. Now, I'm not saying just give up, don't do anything, but the first step is to know, yep, there's some consequences. And here's the fact. I've worked with people who have, because of loss in their life, they've lost jobs. I've worked with people who have had many repercussions, damaged relationships down the road, right? I mean, especially loss and death, there's a lot of major, major consequences to it. And so then we want to figure out, who do I want to be and how am I going to act when I'm feeling that anxiety? Who do I want to be and how am I going to act when I'm in a fog? And first thing that comes to my mind is communicate, communicate, communicate. You've got to let people know, this is what I'm experiencing. And along with that is figuring out who's going to be healthy and safe for you to communicate that to? I've had people say, yeah, I know I'm supposed to tell people, but here's the thing. When I tell people, then I've got my mom coming at me telling me what to do, and then I've got my dad and then the neighbor and all these people telling me what to do, and none of it feels right. And so, yeah, you've got to be able to communicate what's going on, but also have boundaries. Be able to tell somebody, I need you to stop. And I don't feel good about the advice that you're giving me or the direction that you're giving me. And you might not be able to please people. I think that a lot of times in grief, people want to please the people who are trying to help them through the grief, and you don't have much to give when you're going through grief. If you can get through your work day or your school day, if you can get home and eat dinner and get into bed, sometimes that's going to be enough. But that is not going to help sustain you in society, at school, in your career. And so the truth is, everybody around you is going to be saying, hey, take your time, hey, grieve, hey, it's okay. And it might be for you if you're in that position, but I've worked with people where it's not okay. They actually have to compartmentalize their grief because what's on the line is their actual ability to provide for themselves, their actual ability to get into college, right, for teens. The fact is that, a college is very unlikely to say, oh my gosh, you suffer this loss, go ahead and turn your application in way late. Now, if you can pull that off, awesome. And that brings me to, you don't know how people are going to accommodate if you don't communicate. It's really difficult to communicate when you feel grief. So that leads to me to, how do you communicate when you don't want to communicate and you're falling apart when you try to communicate? And how do you ask for accommodations and help when sometimes when you ask for help, you get the wrong kind of help and it feels bad, and sometimes you don't get the help and you don't even want to communicate it, and so it turns into this big ball of mess. And I don't have a good answer.
That's an interesting thing that you said, and John, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I think for me, when I lost my father, there was no one that experienced what I experienced. So there wasn't anybody that I could share my experience with. So my brother didn't want to hear about it because his relationship was different, right? And my sisters were not. They were stepsisters, so they didn't have the same relationship, right? And I was left sort of carrying all the, I got to do this, I've got to clean up this, I've got to do this, and no one really wanted to talk to me about it either. Also, some of that, like, where's my role in here, and who can I talk to about this, and so-and-so's not going to understand it this way, and so then you feel kind of trapped.
So there's this as you're sharing that, something I ask people is, if you could find that person that you could talk to, what is it that you would actually want to talk about and say? And a lot of people get stuck on that, and I'd be happy to put you on the spot right now, but I don't have to, it's up to you. But again, what is it? If you could find that special person that you could talk to safely, and they said the right thing, and you said the right thing, and you got to get off your chest or out and process what you wanted to process, what is it that you're actually talking about? Because for a lot of people, it's theoretical. It's ambiguous. They don't really know what they would talk about, and then if they find that person, they go, this is horrible, huh? Yeah, it's horrible. And they don't know what it is. And so I think sometimes we talk in theory about being able to talk about it and process it, but we don't really think through, what does that actually mean? And I'm going to throw something else out there. Not everybody is going to process by talking about it. And it's interesting because I've had a lot of, not just teens, but adults come in for grief issues who said, everybody wants me to talk, I'm so sick of talking. I'm not. And then when I don't talk about it, they act like there's something more wrong because I don't want to talk about it, and I have to normalize for them, it's okay that you don't want to talk about it. You've thought about it, you've talked about it. That might not be how you move through these stages, and then that's where the pressure of the stages comes in. Yeah, I'm not really identifying with any of this. I said, that's good. This is just a roadmap so people don't feel alone. And so again, if I can put you on the spot, if you could find that person to talk to, what is it that you would want to talk about?
I mean, I think you definitely brought up some good points. I mean, I don't know exactly. I mean, thinking about it now, I think, ideally I'd like to talk just about similar memories and things that we share, experiences we shared. But like I said, thinking about it, I don't know how necessarily that would like help me. I would just think about it, like, yeah, we think about it, and then what next?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how that would necessarily help.
And I think that does have its place. The talking about the memories, we do that at the Celebration of Lives. We do that sometimes, a few months later when you get everybody together in the community, and that's important, right? It memorializes that person. It solidifies your memory, right? Because there's this desperate need and desire to make sure that that person is remembered, that their life wasn't for naught, right? And that not just that they're important to you, but others understand how important they were. And I think that that's part of why it's not just the joy of remembering stuff and sometimes the sadness in remembering stuff, but it's also that we have this desire to make sure that the loss, that who that person was, is concrete for a significant amount of time afterwards instead of just loss. And that I could go on and on about the psychology of that, like, because we ourselves don't want to be forgotten, right? So we definitely don't want to forget people that we care about. And so the way that you communicated that, I want to be able to talk about the memories. You have to do that for yourself. And it might be taking a risk. If you can't find that obvious person to do that with, it might be organizing something. Or it might just be communicating, hey, I think that it'd be good for people, even though we're not good friends and we haven't hung out, it might be good for us to maybe reach out to the family and put together some memories and thoughts. And so sometimes when you organize that desire that you have in your heart right now, when you organize it in a way that is productive, you almost find the excuse to get out of your shell and like reach out. Because right now I assume there's some anxiety in reaching out to people that you're not like best friends with. And then what if they reject that? But when you create a reason and you kind of formalize that reason, it gives you that excuse and that opportunity. And so when you're trying to organize something like that that's close to your heart, that's about your grieving process, just be willing to kind of shift the focus. And it might be on a level that you weren't thinking of, or it might be in a way that you weren't thinking of. And you've almost got to get creative in figuring that stuff out if your first tries aren't working. And then there's this other thing you can do. You can ask somebody for help by saying, hey, do you have any ideas? This is what I would like to do. And that's where the ask for help comes in. It's not just, hey, I feel bad and I feel depressed. Can you help me? It might be, I'm having a hard time reaching out to these guys. I want to connect with somebody. I don't feel like I have access. What I'm doing is not working. Counselor, therapist, friend, mom, Dad, can you brainstorm with me some different ways to maybe reach out to these guys so that I can put this together? And so, again, we think of asking for help in the big stuff, but when we're wrestling with something that's seemingly small like this, and we're an outsider maybe in some ways, we don't think to ask for help in those ways, right? And that's why counselors during this time, they will experience a whole bunch of kids coming in saying, I need help. Okay, how can I help you? I don't know. Okay, did you want to talk about something? No. Whoa. Okay, again, how can I help you? I don't know, I just know I need help. And I think when we're working with teens or the parents, the therapists, the counselors, what we can do is try and get creative and try to almost walk them through some of the smaller stuff that they might need help with. And if you're somebody who's grieving, try to step back from the big things, because it might be all you need help with right now is getting a ride somewhere. It might be that you need help with something so small that you didn't think to ask for that because that's not what everybody expects you to ask for help with. Okay? And so step back and look at some of the smaller pieces of the puzzle. I can't tell you how many times I've had people come in for grief. They start talking about something that's seemingly not associated with it, and then all of a sudden it's all wrapping back to the grief stuff. Okay. And that's hard to connect sometimes.
I think that was a little bit of what we were talking before, and especially with boys or men even. The I'm just going to talk to you isn't really there, but the connection is desired.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why, we've had a lot of boys just come in and sit in our office. It wasn't that they really knew what they needed to say, but they knew they needed a connection.
Yeah.
There was something that, I just need to be here. I
Yeah.
don't want to be there, right? And that's hard as a counselor when you want to kind of,
You want to do something.
well, you do want to feel like you're offering them something, but then you have to realize you are, right?
Yes.
That there's a safe space here, just come in, and it's more about them. It was really more about them connecting to or being in that same space together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that's uncomfortable is the word. It's uncomfortable for everybody. The hard-hitting grief stuff isn't comfortable, and it's really sad, and it's really difficult, but we kind of know what to say and do, right? At the celebration of life or funeral, we know kind of how to do that. We've mapped that out pretty well in the movies and everywhere else, but what we don't know is the awkward, the millions of awkward moments afterwards. And it's not just that not everybody experiences the stages of grief the same, it's that everybody has a different personality. Some people aren't grieving, and they feel so much guilt that they're not grieving, that they have a whole nother mental health road and things going on in their life because there's so much pressure to grieve a certain way. And that's something that people don't tend to talk about. And some of those people aren't feeling the grief the way they were supposed to. And then a year later they are, and it's not that they were in denial. It's just, it wasn't there, right? And so I love the stages of grief, but sometimes I think that we've got to be careful to not shove everybody into one of those stages because it doesn't explain everything in terms of the relationships that are having to be navigated. The school day, the work day, the dynamics going on before the loss, the dynamics going on that have nothing to do with the loss that go afterwards, and some of the relationships, right? There's all this stuff that we don't talk about because we don't know how to. But there's some commonalities that I've seen in terms of what people bring up. I tell people, look, there's no wrong way to grieve, but you do have to work towards functioning. And that's almost a taboo thing for me to say, especially as a therapist. Look, there might be time, and here's the truth. Some people can afford to not function longer than other people can afford to not function. And I kind of talked about that earlier. And we don't want to talk about that. We want to pretend like that doesn't exist. That does exist. I'll put it in school terms. There are some students who, if they don't function for a few weeks, they're going to be fine, and they're still going to get into college. There are some students that if they shut down right now, no matter how much the school tries to help them, they are going to suffer, and it is going to have major consequences on their future. And I think that it's important that we all are willing to be honest about that and talk about that. One of the hardest things I do with my clients is take a look at, well, what are the consequences of you not functioning right now? For adults, it's, are you going to pay your bills or not? And I've worked with adults that are like, I can take the next 6 months off and I'm fine. I've got the money. I've got the type of job that I can do that. I've worked with a mother who had a loss of a child, but she couldn't stop going to work because if she stopped going to work, she was going to get kicked out of her home and she had another child. And it was so hard and sad because the pressure from other people, just take off work, just, take your time and all of this other stuff, wasn't realistic for her. And then she was almost judged. And so I think that's one thing is, as a community, number one, set boundaries on who you allow in your life if they're going to be judgmental. Number two, as a community, we've got to be really careful about the pressure we put on people and in what way, right? No, I don't think all the times, usually the pressure isn't coming from a way that we think it is. Like in this case, all the people in her life thought they were being really kind by saying, hey, take a break, right? You can grieve this. Hey, it's okay if you need to talk. It's okay, right? Say that once, but don't repeat it over and over again, because saying that to somebody, and if that's not what they need or what they're feeling, they start to go, oh my gosh, is there something wrong with me? All these people are telling me to do this thing, and I get that they're being supportive, but it's giving me a lot of anxiety that I didn't have because that's not what my mind, that's not what my body's telling me to do. And so you know yourself better than others, and if you're honest with yourself, you know if you're doing something unhealthy or if what you're doing is healthy. And you know better than anybody if what functioning means for you in your life, because it is different for everybody. And that is a question you have to ask yourself, when do I need to start functioning, and what does that look like for me? Now, while there's no way to grieve that's wrong, there is a way to walk alongside people who are grieving or have experienced loss. Even if you're grieving too, there is a way to walk alongside people incorrectly. And that's another one of those things that I tell people that's really taboo. And people don't like me to say that. I think that I already said judging, okay? And again, I don't think there aren't many people maliciously judging during times of death and grief, right? But it's sometimes the subtle judgments, and it's the subtle expectations turn into judgments or feel like judgments on the other end. And so you don't want to be so persistent in insisting that somebody do something that you think is healthy and right for them. Present it, read their reaction, and then step back unless they're calling you in. Okay? And then this is one that I don't think anybody's ever going to voice out loud, but is really important because I'm not kidding when I say every single person, every family I've ever dealt with who lost a child or lost a family member or lost a parent has talked about this concept. And it's it would be embarrassing for people to admit that they've done this, okay? And you would have to be so self-aware. And that's using death for attention. And that is one of the most damaging things that can happen to a family. And some things that you see is you start expressing or discussing your relationship with that lost person in a way that's grander than it actually was. It's you have breakdowns at inappropriate moments when people are there that takes the attention off of something else. It's overly identifying with the family members and not reading that that's not what they want and not what's healthy for them. And there's other ways that people do it, but look, when there's a loss, especially if this is the loss of a teen, there's a lot of people who are grieving. Entire communities are grieving. But that doesn't mean that everybody should be posting. That doesn't mean that everybody should be in the spotlight. You can ask for help. Anybody should ask for help when you're going through the grief process and communicate to somebody in private, hey, I need some help. Anybody should seek out people to get them together in remembrance as long as it's honoring and the family is wanting that. But you don't get to be in the spotlight just because you're grieving too. There's usually a small circle of people, and those people usually don't want to be in the spotlight and so this is kind of harsh, but if any part of you is desiring attention for it, you're probably not one of the people who actually deserves that attention. And the people who don't want the attention are usually the people that are kind of deserving of that attention. Okay? It's a hard message sometimes to put out there. But I've seen so much damage being done in relationships, lost in arguments and fallouts because of this concept of attention seeking during grief. And again, I'm not saying don't connect. I'm not saying don't communicate. I'm grieving too. There's a difference between I'm grieving and I want to talk about it and I want to get help for it and I want to connect with people, and every other post is about my amazing relationship with this person. I've aggrandized something that wasn't even there. And I've had family members say, there are all these people who don't even know their middle name, and they're showing up at my doorstep. The other thing, this is going to sound funny, if you're in a community that's grieving, before you put a food train together, please ask the family. Because I have, and this is going to sound funny, but it's the one way that people think food. We all love food, and people think, okay, I'm gonna put a food train together to help this family. It's going to be helpful. I've had so many families come and go, I don't know how to say no, but this is the most annoying and burdensome thing going on in my life. We just wanted to go to Chick-fil-A and we got to eat this meatloaf right in front of us, and we're vegetarians. Well, you're not vegetarian if you're going to Chick-fil-A, but you know what I mean, right? And so again, if you're trying to walk alongside families, that food train might be the greatest thing that ever, supported them. But you ask permission. You have the uncomfortable conversation saying, hey, would you like this? No pressure. But is this something that would help you? Is there some other way we can walk alongside you? Even for teens should be up front and asking, and sometimes you got to ask that family directly. A young male teen going to the family and saying, hey, we'd like to walk alongside you, we just don't know how. Just that offer alone might be something that lightens up their day, even though they need nothing from you. Or they might say, as a matter of fact, yeah, we got some stuff for you. And so that brings me to the other thing. Don't ask to walk alongside somebody, and don't ask to help them if you're not prepared to follow through. Because if you say, I'll do anything for you, and you don't, that's on you, because you just told them, hey, tell me what you want. And so sometimes as you're walking alongside, the kindest thing you can do is say, hey, here's the parameters of which I can offer help. Does any of this fit? Is this anything that you want? Okay. Not listening. That's the other piece. It's mind-blowing how often those who are grieving the immediate loss of a family member will tell me, nobody listens. They're not actually listening to me. I said this, they did this. Okay, did you communicate it well? Yes, here's what I said. Yep, that you communicated it. And a lot of times it's the extended family. But sometimes it's people in the community. And so we really want to work hard to listen to the people we're trying to walk alongside who have lost something, right? So it's about healthy communication, but also really hearing them and not assuming you know what's best. I think that that's a way that we really get it wrong sometimes, is we've seen all the Hallmark movies and we listened in church and we took that psychology class, so I know what this family needs because I've been studying the grief cycles for 20 years. No, you might not know. And when they communicate something to you, listen. And if they communicated something that wasn't right, as odd as it may sound, that's on them. And it's on them to communicate to you, hey, there's something else going on, and I need to change what I've communicated to you. So.
I think as a parent, even though it's funny because in my professional life I have a role that it's, of course, so much easier to handle this
Mhm.
with my own students.
Sure.
As a parent, now I'm emotionally involved.
Sure.
You know, and watching your child in pain is the hardest thing.
Mm.
Um, and not feeling like, you know, I guess because the emotional part that all of those great things that I might share with others are just gone.
Sure.
Because it's I'm just
Yeah.
feeling like that because it's hard to watch your kids in pain.
And I think that's why we get so discombobulated with grief, is there may be a lot of platitudes, there's a lot of sayings, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of brilliant theories, but at the end of the day, most of the pain of grief is not going away. And I think when we, again, kind of like in the beginning that I was talking about, when we acknowledge some of this stuff is just going to take time, then we're not trying to fix it. And as a parent, one of the most difficult things that you have to learn to do is recognize that most of the issues you aren't going to fix. You're just going to walk alongside this person. And when I talk to somebody who grieves and they tell me about the safe person in their life, and a lot of times when you've had a direct loss, you figure out who's safe in your life really quick. And they say, it's just easy to be with them. I don't feel like I have to cry. I don't feel like I can't cry. I don't feel like I have to talk. If I do talk, it feels okay. I'm not getting a ton of advice. And so, and I hear that constantly from teens. I hear that from adults. I don't really want it to be fixed. I just don't want to be alone in this process. But if I want to be alone, I want to be left alone. And that's a really odd conundrum and balance. And that's where just keeping the conversation going. And so one of the greatest things a mom or a dad can do is be safe by observing, be safe by being willing to listen, be safe by saying, I don't have any answers for you. And be safe by being honest about what you're going through, right? A lot of times the leaders of the family, of the community, of the school are not the ones coming up with all the answers, but they are the ones who recognize there are no answers to be had right now. It's time to just sit in it. Okay.
You know, it's interesting you say that about watching your own child.
Yeah.
So my daughter, we walked through it, but we were both on pins and needles because my dad's was my person.
Yeah.
And so she was trying to protect me, I'm trying to protect her, we're trying to
Yeah.
do this weird dance,
Right.
but be there, right? And then she called me, and it didn't even register her anxiety and fear and missing, and just burst into tears. You know, and couldn't quantify it in so many ways, but it became clear to me that, you know, oh my gosh, this poor kid, you know. But I think the constant is that she knew, he knows.
Yeah.
You know, you might not always be able to say the right thing or make him be sure that he knows,
Yeah.
but just by walking and being there and constant, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And you're not alone in that dance that people do with each other. And sometimes that dance is the protection, right? You're gonna recognize, you're gonna see that there's all these defense mechanisms that go up that you can't really put your finger on, and they're not written down in any books, and that dance may not have been totally unhealthy, but the fact that you guys could just kind of and have that moment is healthy and right and good, and you're not alone in that. And it's really important, again, to not say, am I grieving correctly? It's as I grieve, as it comes out of me, as I process what I need to process in the most inappropriate ways, how do I recover? Am I able to maintain being the person that I want to be? And if I'm not the person I want to be, can I get back to that? And then, am I working towards functioning, and am I being honest about the fact that right now I can't function? And if I have to get to a point that I can function, am I asking for help? And I think that honesty with ourselves, honesty with the people around us, that won't fix everything, but it'll provide kind of a platform for time to kind of stitch some of the stuff together. And, I get asked, how long is it going to take? I don't know. And what people are asking when they say that, how long is it going to take before I'm not desperately grieving? I don't know. And you might get to the point that you're not desperately grieving and then feel guilty for it. And so then you got to, cope with that. But I think to end, what you're going through in grief is very unique, but you are not alone. And no matter how many times I tell people what you're going through is normal, there are going to be times that you feel totally alone. And you might not find that person to connect to that makes you not feel alone. And all you can do is get it out on the table, be patient, and be willing to sit as well in the muck and in the grief and in the bad feelings. Okay? And then it does pass. I can't tell you how long it's going to take, but it does pass. The horrible parts pass. And you might never forget, and you might, for the rest of your life, on certain occasions, have really bad moments, but it's not going to be all-consuming forever.